So thank you for joining us here today for this gathering of the Center for Spiritual Living Tucson community online. And I know you have lots of choices because you do. And so I'm delighted that you chose to be here with us today. Today's talk title is Seeing with the Eyes of Love. And if you happen to tune in to Sharon's meditation before service, the reading that she did from Gregory Toole was fabulous. And if I had been able to find that one yesterday, I would have put it in my talk. But I didn't, and we didn't plan it. So it worked out perfectly like it does. So, seeing with the eyes of love. Certainly, our present world looks pretty divided, and we get to decide what we see and how we remember, how we think about, how we make use of, how we engage with what we do see. And I want to start today's talk with a poem by a fellow named John Rodell. He calls it his mission statement. The words we form on our tongues can become bombs or acorns. Every time we speak to each other, we have the choice to ruin or to raise each other. When I die, will I be surrounded by a forest of comforting words that I planted? Or will my final resting place be an ash pit where I detonated my pride over and over? O Spirit, help me grow a grove of kindness that stretches from valley to valley. O divine light, help me become an arborist of hope, whose redwoods hold treehouse chapels, where the congregants hold hands and count each other's tears. O mysterious love, help me cultivate a vast wilderness of empathy and mercy, whose soft bark smells like Easter lilies, and where the blooms yawn themselves awake while singing cosmic psalms. O unending creator, help me become a courageous Johnny Appleseed that refuses to cut down trees to build an ark out of my self-righteousness, where I can float away from the suffering of the world. O mystical mover of my heart, teach me how to let every word I utter be a source of shade instead of a cause for shame before I return to the source. I want to plant roots of love so deep into the world that they get tangled up in the mantle and keep the world from spinning quite as madly as it does today. This is my purpose, to turn my acorns into action, to turn goodwill into a giant sequoia, to turn branches into a bright pew bench, to turn judgment into a jungle of kindness. This is why I'm here. And not to sound too preachy, but I think it's why you're here too. We are here to grow the most incredible towering trees of compassion for each other to climb on. O eternal artist, help us replace our nooses with tire swings so that we can take turns rocking back and forth under the thickets of our most gentle wishes for each other, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. If you're on Facebook, you might want to look up John Rodell, R-O-E-D-E-L. He posts new poetry almost every day, and most of it is very much in line with the science of mind philosophy, although I don't think he knows that. And I noticed in the chat, there was a lot of conversation around the song that David played earlier, one of my favorites. I think that Nancy Griffith did the best rendition of it, but from a distance, the world looks blue and green and the snow-capped mountains white. And from a distance, it's not God out there, it's God outside and inside and all around. And so we get to remember that there is no difference between what's on our inside and what's on our outside. And it's so easy to forget that. So, how do we see our world as God sees it, or with God eyes, as I talk about in the Power of Your Word class? Not the vindictive, critical, demanding eyes of the Old Testament God, or the G/D of the Jewish Torah, or many of the writings of the Quran, but with the eyes of love, with the eyes of that beneficent being that sees us and loves us no matter what. How do we see that way? This new way of seeing, or this inspired and impassioned way of seeing, takes work, actually. It takes clear intention. It takes a decision that we get to reinforce and reinterpret over and over and over again. It takes a bit of training, and it takes a lot of practice. Most of the world expects to be happy when the world behaves itself, according to their version of what that means. That was true in the stories of the Old Testament God, too. Remember when we were children? If we didn't get our way sometimes, if we threw a temper tantrum and manipulated the adults in our world a certain way, we'd still get what we wanted. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't, and we got smacked or sent to our rooms or taken outside to the car or got put in timeout. There is that little child that still lives in each of us and wants what it wants and really wants the world to behave exactly like we want it to. And no matter how much we want the world to behave itself, according to our own particular definition of what that means, you and I both know that that's not exactly how it works. It's lovely when the world behaves itself, when this outside world behaves itself, and when it does exactly what we expect it to. It's pretty rare, right? But what about all the times when it doesn't? We've all certainly had that experience for a while with the pandemic and with, I'm not even going to go there, but we've all had the experience of the world not working exactly like we want it to. How do we live in this space and time when the outside world doesn't behave itself? When we practice the principles of the science of mind teaching, we get to remember that what's on our inside is what manifests on our outside. It's the invisible that creates the visible. And this is the great news. That invisible is the easiest place to make a real meaningful change. We get to change our focus. We get to see how we engage with the world and decide what it means. We get to decide what's really ours to do and what's really ours to affect and impact. Most of you remember that image of the 3 concentric circles, one inside the other, the circle of control, the circle of influence, and the circle of concern. Stephen Covey made the image famous in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Each of us has these 3 areas where we can choose to spend our time and energy, our mental energy, our physical energy, our emotional energy. And we can focus and we can decide. And really, truly, there's only one of those circles that we can definitively be in charge, which is a really long-winded way to say that every single one of us, including me, would benefit from remembering to focus most of my energy and my own capacity and capabilities on those things which I can control. And this never, ever, ever includes what anybody else does. it does include. In fact, the only thing it includes is what each one of us thinks, what each one of us feels, and how we decide to interpret, reinforce, redirect, reimagine that feeling, and what each one of us decides and does. And that's really all that's in our control. Everything else, maybe we can influence, maybe we can't. But everything else that we worry about, there is no benefit from worry or being anxious about something that hasn't happened yet. If it's something we can see clearly and act on, then it's worth our expenditure of our own creativity and capability. So I want you to think for a minute about how often you wish the world was different than it is. Think about how often you think when something external happens or doesn't happen the way you want, how often you imagine, I'll be happy or content when or if something happens. You know that's not how it works. And if you think about it, you actually knew this already. This is not something new I'm telling you. There's a reason we call these reminders. I'm just reminding you of something you already know. Every single one of us is always a choice, whether we focus on what's true for any given situation, or whether we focus on the experiences we're having, which can be all over the map if we're not paying attention to our lives. From 365 Days of Richer Living, the daily reading from yesterday, Ernest Holmes and Raymond Charles Barker wrote, "The good in which you believe can triumph over every apparent evil you have experienced. You have a silent partnership with the infinite. This partnership has never dissolved. It never can be. You are to have implicit confidence in your own ability, knowing that it is the nature of thought to externalize itself in your affairs, knowing you are the thinker. Turn resolutely away from every sense of lack, want, or limitation, and declare that the perfect law of God operates in, for, and through you. This is already in our skill set. This is already in our wheelhouse. This is already within our capabilities. And yes, we forget. We get pulled off track, and we, with the help from our friends, sometimes are the only ones that can get ourselves back on track. Why is this true? Because we are made of God's stuff entirely. We are entirely made of God's stuff. And God is love. And therefore, we are love. So Dr. Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind on page 478, this will be quite familiar to some of you. Love is the central flame of the universe, nay, the very fire itself. It is written that God is love, and we are its expressed likeness, the image of the eternal being. Love is self-givingness through creation, the impartation of the divine through the human. Love is an essence, an atmosphere which defies analysis, as does life itself. It is that which is and cannot be explained. It is common to all people, to all animal life, and evident in the responses of plants to those who love them. Love reigns supreme over all. This is an aside, and I'll get back to the reading in a second. What's true about plants is even cooler than Holmes knew about. The movie that Sacred Cinema Group is going to discuss on October 17th is The Hidden Life of Trees. It sounds like fantasy, right? But trees look after each other, and will feed each other if necessary, and warn each other of predators. Basically, they interact and they communicate, and we would say, on some level, they love. So if this is true of plants, we already know we have the experience of our pets and the animals that we interact with in our world. Then it must also be true of us. We love when we remember it and when we choose to act that way. Okay, back to the reading from The Science of Mind. The essence of love, while elusive, pervades everything, fires the heart, stimulates the emotions, renews the soul, and proclaims the spirit. Only love knows love, and love only knows love. Words cannot express the depth, its depths of meaning. A universal sense alone bears witness to this divine fact. God is love, and love is God. And I add, and God as love lives as us when we remember that. We are that love. And we get to decide whether to show that in our presence to the world or not. And we get to decide whether we see with those eyes or whether we see with something lesser. We are always at choice. From today's reading that Sharon did before the service, or earlier in the service, from The Science of Mind, page 459, when we realize that God and humans are one and not two, we shall love both. We shall love humans as expressions of God, and God as the life principle in all. So how do we see with the eyes of love? First, we recognize when we're not, and we change our minds, we change our focus, we change our attention, and we decide to see that way. And we keep practicing until it becomes as habituated in us as all of our other habits are. What's hard about it? It's not hard, it just takes practice. When we can see with the eyes of love, with the eyes of God, everything is love. Everything is lovable. Everyone is lovable. And there are no exceptions. So I want to close with a poem by a poet that I don't know how I found her, but I did. Her name is Jennifer Payne Wellwood, and it's from her small book called Poems for the Path. It's titled Unconditional. Goes like this. First, she has a little preface. We find, though, that the path is not linear. In fact, the more we open to our essential nature, the more the deep roots of our conditioning are exposed. Sometimes, feeling the contrast between the two creates tremendous internal pressure. This too can be part of what cooks us, what forms us, what makes us whole. Now the poem, Unconditional. Willing to experience aloneness, I discover connection everywhere. Turning to face my fear, I meet the warrior who lives within. Opening to my loss, I gain the embrace of the universe. Surrendering to emptiness, I find fullness without end. Each condition I flee from pursues me. Each condition I welcome transforms me and becomes itself transformed into its radiant jewel-like essence. I bow to the one who made it so, who has crafted this master game. To play, it is purest delight. To honor its form, true devotion. So we get to remember that we are love as God, as form, as us, in all of our expressions, in all of our actions, in all of the ways we be in the world. And we get to remember when something is unlovely to our eyes, we get another chance to see it as God sees it. This is not easy. It sounds easy. It is not easy because we get lots of opportunities, right? To see this experience that we're having and to look at it again and again and again until we can see it with the eyes of love. So if I've said anything that catches your attention that you'd like to focus on, hold that in your mind while I speak the words of this affirmative prayer today. I remember that love is God and God is love, and each one, every being, is also God in form. And each one is God in expression. And when we forget, even when we forget, even though we forget, the basic principle of life, love, lives in, as, and through each one. The basic promise of life, that love lives in, as, and through each one, doesn't change. And we get to remember and practice and know and become more and more of this God essence that lives and desires to be expressed through each one. And so even though I have lots of opportunities to see the world as broken or damaged, I get to look again. I get to see again. I get to remember, to put back together and to know, newly to know again. That God is love and God is life and God is peace and God is joy and harmony and goodness. And each of these God qualities lives in me and as me and in and as all beings. And so I remember this human game that I play, that each one plays, and that each one has that challenge and practice at all times to see as God sees and to engage from that place of divinity that already lives as each one. So I bless us as we practice, and I know that each one already lives as love, even when they forget. And so I bless us in our practice. I bless us in our doing. I bless us in our failing and our getting up and trying again. And I know that God as love is what makes the world work for everyone. So remembering this wholeness, this peace, this joy, this harmony, this celebration, I relax into these words and I let them be. And so it is.